Hey everybody, this is Timothy Hansen from MAXDEPTH. We're back again today to cover the Freelancer's Guide to Mari. Now, Mari, if you're unfamiliar, is a next-gen texture painting software package from the Foundry. And over the course of this video, we're going to show you exactly why Mari is so powerful. We're going to bring in a model, we're going to paint on that model, we'll use the number of available tools within Mari to harness the most bang for our buck in terms of getting the most out of our textures. And then we'll export our textures and give you, essentially the full run of what it is to work with Mari, start to finish. So if you're familiar with me and the tutorials that I do and articles that I've written, you know that I stay pretty software agnostic. I'm a big believer that there's a tool for every job and there are multiple tools available. So whatever an artist chooses to use that makes them the most comfortable is only going to make them more productive. So, for the most part, I try and toe the line, not, lean one way or another, this software versus that software. But Mari, however, is one of the lone examples where I will definitely draw a line in the sand and say that I knew the first time I used Mari about three and a half years ago that I would never use another software package to do my texturing again. And it's held true. It's been almost 4 years, and literally every project I've worked on at, probably about a dozen studios, I've used Mari every time. It's never let me down. It's the most powerful, robust, and easy to use of all the available texture painting options out there. And I'm confident by the end of this video, you're going to be just as in love with Mari as I am. So let's get started. Now, the first thing we need to do is get a new project built and import our model. So to do that, come down to New, and then come up here to the top and name our project. And now go to Path, and then hunt down where your model lives and import it. Now, these options here are going to be relevant to us in this video because they involve PTEX and a PTEX workflow. I'm a big believer in UVs and setting up UVs. I know a lot of people don't like to do it, but it's a necessary evil and it gives you the most control. So for this video, we're going to be using a model that's using UVs, so we can ignore this palette. Now, coming down, there are a number of options to start with that we can enable. There's color, dirt mask, down the line to spec. But we're just going to start out with a color channel. So click Create, and then there are a number of sizing options. Generally, I tend to paint 2K or 4K unless it's a hero object. If it's a hero object, I'll go 8K, sometimes 16K. But you really need a beefy video card to swim in this water. This is deep water for a video card. So today we're just going to stick to 4K maps. Now the type is going to be color, file space normal, we can leave that there. Now depth, we have available options again to paint in 8-bit, 16-bit, or 32-bit. I have a Quadra 6000, so I'm going to be painting in 32-bit, but it's a fair assumption that 16-bit is what the majority of people use. But we're going to go 32-bit, and that's it. So click OK, and now Mari's going to build our scene. Okay, so here we are. Now we have our model, and the first thing that you're gonna find out is that the navigation system in Mari is going to throw you for a loop. So the first thing I always do is go up to Edit, Preferences, and then we're going to go to Navigation and switch it from the default of Mari to Maya. Or if you're used to Houdini, Lightwave, whatever your software package of choice is, I use Maya. So I'm going to set that, and then that's going to give me the same navigation system that I would know in Maya, where you hold down Alt, middle click will translate. We can scale with right click and just rotate by holding down Alt and scratching on your Wacom or whatever it is that you're using. I definitely would recommend only using Mari with a tablet. It's possible to paint with a mouse, but you're really cutting yourself off at the knees in terms of pressure sensitivity, and just it's made for a tablet, so use a tablet. Okay, so first things first, we changed our navigation to Maya navigation. And then you'll see there's a number of palettes and a pretty robust little palette up here. So let's start off with the most important things. So channels. Channels is going to be your diffuse, your spec, displacement, all the things that you would have in a basic shader in your software package of choice. Now it starts off with a color, and now within that color, this is the layer palette. So this layer palette corresponds directly to color. And then if we had another channel, which I can just create now by clicking this button here, let's create a spec channel. Let's make it 4K, 32-bit, and click OK. And now you'll see that we have a spec channel as well. And now the spec channel, when you see down here, you click on spec, up here your layer palette will correspond to the spec channel. Click on the color channel and your layer palette will correspond to the color panel. You can also click here and break that layer palette off. You can click this little pin button here to pin it. Otherwise, if you mouse away, that menu will disappear. So let's say for sake of example, we want this, and then we can drag it over and dock it here. And so we can have both layer palettes that correspond to each of our channels as an option to us. I usually just click back and forth between the two because I like to keep a large clean palette system. But that's basically the easiest way to describe how things work and correspond to each other in terms of channels and layers. Now all of your layers are going to be almost exactly like what you would expect if you are familiar with Photoshop. It's a top-down stack. So as we add more layers, we can paint and it will go top-down. Whatever is at the top will be on top of everything below it. Now let me just clear out of those. And so that's our layer palette. And now within our layer palette, there are a number of options to us. As we saw before, we can create another layer. We can add a layer mask, add mask stack, add adjustment layer. Now within the adjustment layers, it's again everything you're familiar with in terms of Photoshop or compositing packages, your standard levels, contrast, color, brightness, everything that you would need. These are your layer adjustments. Now again, they can be added as a layer to the stack, or if you right click on a layer, you have a number of options available to you here as well. As you can see, add adjustment layer, procedural layer, so on and so forth, remove. There's layer mask, add mask. We'll go into that later. Adjustment stack, same thing. And it's just essentially all the functionality you have down here, you can also have if you right click, allowing you to have adjustments on a per layer basis, not just in the stack. Okay, so moving on down the line, after our adjustments, we have procedurals. And now within procedurals, you'll have basic things, it's a color constant vector, environment, things like triplanar projection, which is going to be huge. This is one of the things you're going to use a lot, triplanar projection. Geometry, procedurals, again, this is where you can add turbulence. Tiled, that's going to be another one that you're going to use a lot. And so this is where you add your procedurals. And then down the line, duplicate layers, remove layers, and assign color tag to the selected item. Basically, you could select this, come here, and then hit yellow. And then up here, you can scroll through and highlight. If I make another layer here, add a different color, we can select only the layers that correspond to their layer tags of color. But let's go ahead and just remove that and go back to name. Okay, so that's our layer palette. Covered things like our add new layers, add adjustments, add procedurals, things of that nature. Now, there are a number of other window palettes, and when you first open up your Mari, you may see a different configuration of palettes. And if that's the case, the best way to see all available palettes is to come up to View, Palettes, and then you have access to all of them here. So anything that isn't already open, you just click on it, and that's how you find it. So say, for example, I want to see the objects in my scene. Here's how I open that palette. Okay, close that out. So just remember, View, Palettes, and that's how you find all your palettes. Okay, so now moving on, let's go through some of our additional palettes, things that are going to be very important to us. And let me make a little bit of room here first. And now let's talk about Paint Buffer. Now, Paint Buffer is an extremely important thing that you're going to need to stay on top of, that you're going to need to keep check, make sure that you have the proper buffer size set, because if you don't, you're going to be, again, cutting yourself off at the knees and potentially not painting at the full bit depth and resolution available to you with your textures. Now, what does that mean? Looking here, we can see our buffer size is set to 2K. This is going to not work for us. We're painting 4K textures, and the majority of the textures that we're going to be projecting are going to be much larger than a buffer size of 2048. So say, for example, if you have a 4K texture that we're going to be projecting and painting down, but our buffer size is only 2K, we're literally only going to be using half the available resolution of that image to be projected down onto our model. Now, I'll go back over that again later and give you a visual example of what that's going to look like. But essentially, your paint buffer can be found and controlled in this painting view tab. So let's go ahead and just set this up to 8K for now. Would you like to blah, 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 blah? Yeah, we haven't painted anything, so go ahead and discard. Okay, so paint buffer, this is where you set your buffer size. It's always important to remember to keep your buffer size at minimum as large as the largest texture that you're going to be painting with, or potentially just a little bit larger. So moving on from the painting palette, the next most important thing to cover is the projection palette. Now, an important thing for the navigation of Mari and how you use it, by default, this right here is set to auto bake and clear. And now what does that mean? Well, if I just go ahead and paint on this object, the second I hit the Alt key, it's going to bake that texture down. And now, again, what's important about the Alt key? The Alt key is how you do all navigation. By hitting Alt, you see that I'm starting to bake. Okay, so now that's baked. And you'll see, you remember again, holding down Alt and click and drag is how we do our navigation. Well, say you painted something down and you want to, turn your model, see, if you've got it exactly where you want it. The second you hit Alt to try and navigate, it will bake that texture. And if that's the way you want to work, that's great. But for me, I want to tell it to bake only when I want it to bake. Okay, so how do we do that? So let's reverse out of that. So you come here and in bake behavior, click manual. And so why that's important to us as well in terms of a workflow is, let's say, I make a little paint here, but maybe that's not exactly where I want it. So if I hold down Alt and middle mouse button click and move my model, our paint stays in the same spot, and we can move our model around and put that paint exactly where we want it to be. And the reason that this acts this way is basically the best way to describe it is Mari is, if you think of this viewport as a pane of glass, and we're just painting on a pane of glass that's over top of our model, and it only goes through and becomes applied to our model as paint when we bake it. And so to bake it, you hit the B key. Okay, and so now that's baked down onto our model. But if you see that paint that we had just created, it stays there even after we've baked. And the reason that that can be useful is, say, if you have a stencil or something and you're stamping it around, multiple places on your object, you don't want to have to sit there and paint down again or stamp it down again. So you have the option to reuse what you've painted down onto your virtual glass until you're satisfied and want to clear it. And now, how do you clear your painting? Well, in order to do that, hold down Control, Shift, and hit the C key, and that will clear your paint buffer. Okay, so again, changing your bake behavior from auto bake and clear to manual, you use the B key to bake, Control, Shift, C to clear your painting. Okay, and now let me remove that paint here really quick. All right, and you'll see, in addition to changing our bake behavior with the projection and the projection settings, there's also a number of important features within, and this is going to be all of our masking. And now with masking, to activate that, the hotkey is G. So if you hit G, you'll see that a mask has been applied to our model. And this can be useful to us in a number of ways. When you're painting at glancing angles, things of that nature, or say you have a piece of geo like this that has a bevel to it, and you only want to paint on this front face and not on the bevel itself, this is where masking comes in handy. And for me, the main masks that I use that I'm going to point out here is going to be the edge mask, the depth mask. We have backface mask on inherently because the underneath side of our model has been deleted, because I always delete back faces. It's a good practice to have to keep your model polycount down. But so this way, we're not painting on the underside where nobody's ever going to see anything. So that's backface mask, that's on by default. But going back to our masks, hitting G, we'll start with our edge mask. Now, within the edge mask menu, we have fall off end and fall off start. And this is going to help us manipulate our mask and make it do what we want it to. So we can reduce it, drive it, so that maybe I just want to paint on this face of the bevel. Maybe I just want to paint on this face. And so you'll see, if I come in here a little bit closer, and I go ahead and I start painting, I hit B to bake that down, Control Shift C, and clear my painting, and then I hit G to remove the mask. You'll see that I was able to paint along a glancing angle, but keeping my paint only where I wanted it to. And I was able to do that by manipulating the edge mask. Okay, so fall off end and start is what you're going to use to manipulate your masks. So moving on from edge masks, we're going to go down to depth mask. And the depth mask works essentially the way that you think it would. You can change the start and finish point, manipulate the fall off to be a perfectly crisp line or a very diffuse blurred fall off. And you can see there. So now, for sake of example, let's paint. Change this back to black. Take one paint stroke and go all the way down. And now, what you're going to notice here is that the line will start perfectly crisp and black at the beginning. But as we start going down through and into our depth mask, it gets lighter and lighter and then falls off to nothing. Now, let's bake that down. Clear the palette. Turn off our depth mask. And here you can see, again, that the stroke started solid, solid, and it gets less and less and less as it falls off into the depth. And that's the depth mask. So let me back out of here. And now the last one I want to show you after depth mask is going to be the Fractal Noise Mask. And this one's going to be another very useful mask. So you can see here, just general fractal noise. You can change the seed to move it around. You can change the contrast to blur it out or make it very sharp. Again, you can increase the size to get like a really tiny fine grain noise, or increase it to get sort of a dirty feel. Okay, and then now let's say, for sake of example, I like how this looks. Like, I feel like this has a good grungy factor that I'm looking for. The other thing you can do is come down to invert, and basically what that will do is it will invert the noise, and everywhere that I see that I like the shape of this noise, invert it, and then I can go ahead and paint. And then bake that down. Clear it, and then turn off my mask. And you can see that it has painted the noise in the shape of my fractal. And so that's a good way to get some good non-uniform dirt and grunge into areas. Once you've painted over it, you feel like it needs a little something extra. That's a really simple, easy way to have non-uniform grunge and things like that added to your textures. Okay, so that's our masking. So again, we have our fractal noise mask, which we were using here. There's your depth mask and then edge mask. Okay, and now let's move on. Quickly undo this. Okay, and the next palette that is going to be very important in your texturing is the image manager. And now what the image manager is, it's a collection of textures and alphas and things like that that you bring in. This will be an empty palette when you go to the image manager, and then you import images by selecting and then opening. Okay, and we already had these loaded up here, so I'll go ahead and delete these guys. I just wanted to show you how to bring them in. To delete, just select and remove. And so now we have these images available to us. And now, how do we use these? Well, the first thing is to change your brush from a basic painting brush and go to the Paint Through Image onto Canvas brush. So select that, and then pick one of your textures and drag it into the canvas, and you'll see visual representation of our texture. Now I'm going to move in a little bit tighter here, and the way that you can manipulate this texture is with a simple set of hotkeys. So if you hold down Shift and then just drag your mouse, this is how you can move the texture. Control and Shift will scale it, and just Control will rotate it. Well, first things first, again, always remember in our layer palette to create a new layer for all of our painting. You never want to paint on the same layer. You want to be non-destructive. That way, if we do something and we don't like it, we can either hide that layer, add an adjustment layer to that layer and fix it. But if you paint everything onto one layer, you're stuck. Okay, so let's just call this grunge. And then now, let's say I have this placed where I want it to be. Let's go ahead and hit G to turn our edge masking back on, because I don't want to paint on this bevel. So to bring back my projection palette and go down to edge mask, and let's again manipulate the fall off to get a nice crisp edge for our painting. Okay, so now I can be, I don't have to be super precise about where I place this texture, because I know that as soon as I paint, it's not going to paint on that bevel because of the mask. So if I go ahead and just start drawing it in, okay, you can increase your brush size by using the plus and the minus keys. You can go up or down. All right. Now let's say that that's what I want. So hit B to bake. And again, let's say I like this pattern. You remember, if you don't do the Control-Shift-C and clear it, you can move your model and still reuse what you already have in the paint buffer. Bake it down, and I can just keep moving the model around and baking in whatever I want, whatever I need. But let's clear that. Okay. And then now hit G to turn off our edge mask. And we can see exactly what we've painted. Okay, now let's say that I'm unhappy with this. Well, on our individual layers, as we mentioned before, we'll right click and then come down to Layer Mask, Add Mask, and then hit Reveal All. And the difference between Reveal All and Hide All is that for this mask, if we use Reveal All, it will keep everything that we've painted visible, and then we can paint out what we don't want. And if you do Hide All, it will hide everything, and then as we paint, we'll be revealing with the mask. So let's go Reveal All. And then we'll need a black texture to paint with. Go back to our standard brush, and then as we paint, we're cleaning up our mess. And that's just using a mask on our individual layer. And now with this, you have to do just like anything else. You have to hit B to bake, and then that way it'll take Shift Control C and just clean it up. Okay. We've got our nice clean edge, and we cleaned up that bleed over that we had. Now, let's say again that, you know, maybe I don't want this to be on that bevel. Well, we can turn back on our edge mask and then invert the fall off, and again, just paint it away. And then our mask will give us a nice crisp line. B to bake, Control Shift C, G to turn off our mask. And again, you can see that we were able to cleanly remove our unwanted paint with a mask. So again, right click, Layer Mask, Add Mask, Reveal All, or Hide All, and then just paint it off with black. Or if it's Hide All, paint it back on with the color of white. Okay, so now that's our image manager and painting through. Now, if you remember earlier, there was something I mentioned that I wanted to circle back around on, and it was the paint buffer. Now, if you look at our images here, you'll see that this decal that we have has a maximum width of 4500. So essentially you can kind of consider this like a 4K texture. Look at this guy, 2000 by 3000, 3000 by 3000. So basically, to achieve maximum resolution with these textures, our paint buffer has to be at least this large or larger. And so one of our largest images is just a little bit over technically 4K in terms of width. So if we go to our painting palette, hide these and just bring up the paint buffer, I'm going to switch over to the UV view just so it's a little bit easier to see the difference. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to paint through with varying degrees of buffer size. Now you'll see to this point our buffer size is at 2K, which is going to give us basically only half of the available resolution of what this texture has to offer. But I can exaggerate this point by taking it down to 512. So discard, and then now we have our 512 paint buffer. And if I paint down, oops, sorry, I'm still on our mask. Let's create a new layer. Paint buffer grunge, and paint down. Okay, and then hit bake, and then clear it. You'll see that we have a pretty noisy and low resolution texture compared to what this texture actually is. So now keep that in mind, and now let's increase this paint buffer size up to 8K. Okay, and then now if we paint again right underneath it, you'll see that the resolution that we're painting down onto our canvas is of an extremely superior quality because we're getting the maximum resolution of our texture. So bake that. And you'll also notice that the baking is taking a little bit longer because it's painting down such a higher resolution map. Okay, clear that buffer and then move our texture out of the way, and you can immediately see the difference. If your paint buffer is not set up properly, again, you're wasting your time essentially. Your paint buffer needs to be, as we've said, at least as high in resolution as your largest texture, and preferably a little bit higher just to give yourself mistake-free room. Yeah, I mean, the proof's in the pudding right there. Incorrectly sized paint buffer, low res texture. Correct paint buffer, high res texture. Okay, and so again, painting, buffer size, change it to minimum, same size as your largest texture or a little bit higher, and then you can check the resolution of your textures that you're projecting through by selecting them and then looking at the height and width. And so essentially whatever the larger of the two values are, your paint buffer needs to be at least as large as that. Okay, so that's the image manager and projecting with textures. And another thing that I can point out, it's good to know, is up here on these menus. Now you'll notice that there's some approximation of shadowing, and you can turn that on or off with this toggle here. In addition to that, we can turn on or off the sort of preview specularity that we're seeing here. take it down, and then you can go all the way down to just a flat shade. So you can see literally only your paint, no approximation of the model itself. And this can be useful in certain instances when you're checking what you've done. In most cases, you'll paint with your spec on. Shadows can be on or off, and you can manipulate the lighting that these shadows are reacting to by going to the light palette. So let me break that off. And if we select the light, and as we rotate this around, you can see that it's altering our lighting. Okay, so we are able to manipulate our preview lighting within Mari. And if you tick these, you can turn them on and off individually. Okay, so it's just a good little tip. Now the next thing I want to show you is going back to something that we touched on briefly before. It's going to be the UV tile procedural and the triplanar projection procedural. Okay, so as I said before, working non-destructively in our new layer system, we can turn on or off the layers that we've painted. And I want to turn these off just for now so that we can have an easier time seeing our procedurals. So come down here, and first let's take a look at the tiled. Move this up, move that down. Okay, so what we can do here, this swatch is where we want to drag the texture image that we want to tile across our model, and we can bring something in here in one of two ways. We can either take one of these and drag it in, and then we'll get that image tiled, or you can click this and then select. I usually just drag from the image manager. Okay, and so you'll see right away that we have this sort of circular brushed metal texture tiled across our model, and the tiled method is going to be incredibly useful, but you also have to do a bit of pre-production before you can use it. It won't work for you in every case because, if you can see, let me throw a quick adjustment layer on here. Go to Adjustment Stack, Add Adjustment, and Levels. And that'll give us a levels adjustment for only this layer, like we spoke about earlier. So click in here. Give ourselves room to see what we're doing. And then let's just crunch it a little bit so we can see that exaggerated tile pattern. All right, and as you can see, the reason why you have to do a little bit of pre-pro if you're going to use the UV tile is that if your UV tiles are not set up properly, you'll have textures going in all different directions, which potentially won't make sense for what you're trying to do. And to show you again how this is happening, the procedural itself will tile that image across all of our multi-tiles. But if our tiles are not oriented directionally to accommodate this type of tiling, that's when you get the broken up, non-uniform tiling. Okay, so UV tiling can be really useful to get a large amount of sort of base coat down, but if your UVs aren't set up for that, it could be problematic. Now let's take a look at the other procedural available to us that will be a lifesaver. We want to go to Environment, Triplanar Projection. And now triplanar projection is going to be very similar to the UV tile, but it's going to have a larger degree of control available to you. So just for sake of argument again, let's take this image. Let's add that adjustment stack of a levels adjustment. So we can see a little better. Okay, and so now there are 3 views for the triplanar projection. There's the front, the top, and the right. Now starting with the right, we have a number of options available to us to manipulate this image. Now the scale is usually the first thing that I manipulate. As you can see, with a scale of 1 to 1, we have an extreme amount of tiling on that image. So we want to take that scale down. So let's go 0, 0, 5. Okay, and then now we can see our texture a little more clearly. And now there's repeat. That we can adjust. There's also angle, where we can rotate our projection. There's offset. And then there's vertical and horizontal offset. Okay, now let's say that we really want this to be 0.001. Because we want our lines to be fairly seamless. Now, if we take this image, go ahead and close our channel view, you can take this and drag it down to the next. And that's going to give us our top down. And if we do the same thing, go top down, 0.001, 0.001, we'll see our brushed metal texture being projected evenly across the entirety of the model. Okay, and so now you're getting a nice blending of the top down with the side projection, and then all we have left is the right. Drag this down again, and just keeping things uniform. And there you can see that with triplanar projection, we can very quickly and efficiently get a very large amount of base with using projections. Okay, we're coming into the home stretch here. Just a few more things to point out. We're going to talk about shaders, sharing layers, and final export. So I'm going to use a different model here really quick, just because it'll be a better illustration of working with our shader module. So first thing I'm going to do is, in our shader palette, we're going to create a shader. I'm going to use a Blinn, but you have available Phong, Cooktorrents, Beckman, and Blinn. So start there. And then this will bring up a dialog where we can pipe in our channels that we've been painting and doing work on, and use them as the reference that's going to drive the Blinn itself. So as you can see here, we're going to set the diffuse color to be working off of the color channel that we have here. And now I want to create a spec pass to use so that I can take a look at how the spec is going to be affected on our model. Now that's where we're going to come into a neat little feature in the newer versions of Mari, which is going to be layer sharing. And so the first thing I need to do is create a spec channel. Okay. And then now I want to open up a layer stack specific to the spec, and I want to use my diffuse color channel to drive my spec. And how I can accomplish that is I can share my diffuse layer with the spec layer by holding down Control Shift and then click and drag the color channel information into the spec layer stack. Alright, and now I don't need this base, so I'm going to remove that layer. And then now if I come back over to our shader module, right now you can see I'm on the blend that I created, but I want to see just the layer that I'm working on at the moment, which is going to be the spec layer. So to do that, go from the shader that you've created and click on current channel. Okay, and so now I'm back onto my color channel, and I need to highlight the spec channel so then that way I can work within its layer stack. And now that I have this shared color information that came from the color channel, I'm going to throw an adjustment layer on it of luminosity to essentially just get me black and white values. You can also manipulate layer levels and things like that, but I usually just go with luminosity. So now I have a grayscale version of my color image. And again, these little red bits are just backface masking. I can turn that off. View, palettes, projection, and turn off the backface. Okay, just in case that's distracting. Alright, so now that I have this grayscale version, I want to also add a levels adjustment because I want to exaggerate my grayscale image so that I can drive the areas that I want to have more specularity. All right, and so let's say that's what I want. Now if I go back to my shader palette, reactivate the blend, okay, and so now again we see the color information because we've already piped in our diffuse color channel into the diffuse color here. Now into spec channel, I want to select spec, and now if I go down, give me a little bit more room to work, you'll see there's a number of sliders here to where we can manipulate our shader. And now to exaggerate this, I want a bit more of a spec hit just so that I can show you that as I tumble around, we're getting spec hits. We can see the roll off across our model. And now that's one great thing about the shaders is you can set it up so that it will mimic pretty closely what it will look like once you apply all of your shaders within your rendering package of choice. Now, let's say for sake of argument that I like the specularity of these eyes, but I don't want there to be so much of a spec hit in here. Well, we can manipulate that by creating another layer. Actually, let me clean this up so you can see a little bit better. Making another layer on the spec channel because the spec channel is driving our spec hit of our shader, and it's all connected. It all happens real time and it's all live. So everything that I do over here will automatically update in our shader and we'll see a live representation of it. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my regular brush and I'm just going to paint black into my spec channel. And you can see that as I'm doing that, it's removing specularity. Okay, so now bake it down, clear the palette, and you'll see now that roll off isn't affecting this area here. And if we go back to the current channel, you can see again that as I'm painting black in here, I'm removing white bits, allowing for the specularity to be registered in the shader itself. Okay, now you can also use things like bump and displacement, and just for sake of argument, we're going to repurpose our black and white map from the spec and use that to drive a little bit of bump. There we go. And it all happens live. It's real time. Okay, and see, now we can see that specularity is rolling across the eye, but we're seeing, we're registering a bit of a tactile quality due to the bump now. And again, using something that we've already shown before, if we hit the light palette and select a light, we can see that our shader really does have all the physical properties that we would want to in this sort of preview window. You can see that moving lights around, we can see how they affect the specularity that we're getting in our shader. And again, all happens real time. Okay, so that's just a quick bit on how to set up a shader, how to use our channels to drive the shader, and then we have sliders here to manipulate our shader to dial it into where we would want it on our regular 3D package of choice. And we can use techniques like layer sharing from one channel to the other to help drive our painting and our texturing, and it's just a more efficient workflow, and it saves a ton of time rather than copying and pasting. And just sharing the layers gets you right there, right out of the gate. So now let's move on to the final part of the video where we export our textures. Now, let's say we're happy with this. This is our final version where we're ready to go. I need to get these maps out of Mari and back into my 3D package of choice. So how you export your textures once you painted, you can come down here to your channels, click on one channel, and select Export Flattened. And it'll give you a number of options: export current channel flattened, export all channels flattened, and export everything flattened. And now what does this mean, export flattened? Well, as you can see with the layering system that we have and things that we've been working with in the stack, flattening it essentially will bake all of these down into one image, so that every adjustment that we've made within this channel flattens the color channel. And that's what we're going to want to do. We're going to want to export flattened, and you can either do it on a per channel basis. So let's say I only wanted to export the color channel because I had a revision. You have the option of right clicking and then only exporting the current channel being the one that's highlighted. Or if we're at this stage of the game where this is our first export, we want to export everything, all of our channels, our color, our spec, everything that we've painted. So right click, export flattened, export all channels flattened. Okay, and then now this will bring up our export dialog. And all you need to do here is set the project path where you want to save your flattened textures. And then down here in the template, you have a number of format options, bitmaps, HDRIs, JPEGs, so on and so forth. But we're going to be using EXRs. So change this to .exr. And then you'll notice here, what is actually going to be output is just the name of the channel and then the UDIM patch that corresponds to multi-tile texture patch that we've set up. So essentially, if we have 10 UV tiles, this will start out at 1001 and then go on to 1002, 1003, so on and so forth. And then we want to do entity, object name. So $, entity, and then you'll see what that does is by entering entity here in the output path itself, it's going to put the name of the object that corresponds to the channel that you've been painting on. So let's say we had a model with this actual bee character that we have here that I'm using from a different project. There was a head, there was a thorax, there were legs, wings, things like that. And each object had their own tiles of color and spec and things like that. Just adding this entity tag is a good way to find the exact texture that we want to find, especially when you have a large number of objects. So anyway, adding the entity will add the name of the actual OBJ that we were painting on, and then the name of the channel, and then the corresponding UDIM tile numerical sequence. It's also a good idea to just add spaces to break it up. So that's what we're going to go with. So again, if you click in the dialog and just hover with your mouse, you'll see the list of available tags that you can use, just like the entity. There's $entity, $channel, $layer. These are all the things that you can use with tokens to just add a little bit more information to your rendered. And all that's left now is to click Export Patches, and it will run down the list, exporting and flattening each of your channels along the way. And with each one, it will bring up the dialog box so that you can put in entity, channel, and all these things that you need to change the file format to EXR for each of your available channels. And that's it. Okay, so just recapping what we learned here today. We want to bring in our models. We're going to be working within channels. Our channels are going to be things like our diffuse color, our spec, things of that nature, reflection, all these things that we can paint. And what we're going to be painting on for each channel is a layer stack. And within that layer stack, we have things like adjustment layers, procedurals, masking that we can use. And we can also use our layers to drive other channels. So we can, as we've seen, use the color channel to drive the spec channel, which we then pipe into a shader over here in the shader palette. Now, again, recapping, another important thing is our painting palette, which is where we have our paint buffer. And remember to always set your paint buffer size to at least as large as your largest texture that you're going to be painting with and texturing with. Otherwise, you're not using your maximum available resolution, and you're just wasting your time. So make sure that you always have your paint buffer set to a minimum of the same size as your largest texture, and you adjust your paint buffer in the painting palette. And then back again to the projection palette. This is where we changed our auto bake and clear bake behavior to a manual bake behavior. And baking's hotkey again is B. Control-Shift-C will clear the palette once you're done and ready to paint something new. We also covered a number of masking options down here: edge mask, depth mask, fractal masks, things like that. All useful tools, and these can be found in the projection palette. And you remember all of our other available palettes are under the view palettes, and this is where we can bring up things like our image manager, which is going to be awesome for painting and projecting textures. We have things like our lighting palette, object palette, and that's pretty much it. So everything you need in here, you can activate and dock it and move it around. Now, one last little tip that I would give whenever I use Mari, especially if I'm coming from ZBrush, is decimate your model and paint on the decimated version, because then you don't have to worry about UV smoothing and things of that nature, where sometimes if you bring in a low polygon object and you paint on it, you can notice that once you build your shader network in something like Maya, when you hit render and smooth your object with a Cat Clark or something like that, sometimes you can see some smearing and stretching along the UV borders. But one way to easily get around that is, again, say for sake of example, if you were sculpting in ZBrush, to export out your low polygon model that you're going to displace and use that within Maya to do the displacement and setting up your final renders. But you can fake and get an approximation of exactly what that displacement is going to look like by decimating your object in ZBrush and then bringing that decimated version into Mari and painting on it. And now Mari is, again, very robust, and it can handle high polygon counts. That's what I would suggest as a workflow, is to decimate your model, paint on the decimated model, because that will have all of the same displacement and detail that your final displaced version will have in your 3D software package of choice. And you just, save yourself from a possible problem of UV smoothing errors. So that's it. Hope you have enjoyed this video. You can follow us on Twitter at the MAXDEPTH. You can find us on Facebook at MAXDEPTH-VFX. And as always, you can find us on our website, max-depth.com, and our message boards. Okay, so hope you love this video and love Mari, and I can see many a happy day ahead of painting some amazing textures for you. So enjoy.